This is a step-by-step tutorial on how to hand sew a monster plushie. Start by cutting out the blush, beaks, eyes, and the feathers. Then sew the eyes as well as the two pieces of feathers together. This is an example of what the beak looks like, and to do that we sew this top part first. First, sew your string through the inside of the beak so that the end knot doesn't show. And once the top part of the beak is sewn, this is what it should look like. So we finished cutting out the pieces for the front part, and now we will move on to the pieces for the back part of the monster, which are these orange plates. So the plate, we are going to sew this part of the plate, and we are going to leave the other side open so that we can put stuffing inside and eventually sew the bottom two parts onto the monster itself. So now that we've sewn this, we can start flipping it over, and after you flip it over, it should look like this, and you are going to repeat this for the other two plates. These plates will be used for the back side. We've finished the front and back pieces. We are going to cut the bodies themselves, and it should look like this. Next, we are going to cut the left wing, right wing, and the tail, and we're going to cut two pieces for the left wing and two pieces for the right wing. This is what the finished pieces should look like. So to sew these, we will sew along the edges. And remember to leave the bottom open so that we can connect it back to the monster. And remember to sew in small stitch lengths and leave a space between your stitch and the outer edge. So after sewing the arms and the tail, this is what it should look like, and remember that the bottom parts are open. Now we will move on to cutting the horns, and we will cut it on this yellow piece of fabric, and remember to cut 4. So after cutting out the 4 pieces, we're going to sew them together, and again leave the bottom part open but sew everything else. Now that we have all the pieces of the monsters, we are going to sew the front pieces to the front part, and we're going to start with a beak, and to do that, sew over here and then over here along the edges, and then when you get to here, stop and put some stuffing inside and then finish sewing it. So this is just a time lapse of how I sewed my beak. So I started off with the first side and then moved on to the second side. I sewed on the third side, and I stopped there, and I left an opening to put stuffing inside. And after I put stuffing, I finished sewing the 4th side of the beak. This is what it looks like when all the front pieces are sewn. Next, we are going to sew the 3 plates onto the back side of the monster. And just to give an example, sew the plate onto the monster and eventually leave a space to put stuffing inside. After putting stuffing, just finish sewing everything. Do the same for the other 2 plates. Moving on, we are going to sew the tail onto the back side, and to do that, we're going to flip it over. Then just directly sew it onto the monster. Now we have our completed front and back side of our monster, and we're going to put it on top of each other and leave a gap at the bottom so the child can stuff it themselves, and start right here. Keep sewing until here where we sew on our arms. After sewing our arms, we continue to sew up till here where we sew on our horns, and then keep sewing and sew on our other horn. Continue sewing till here where we sew our other arm, and then keep sewing till right here. After sewing the first section, I brought in the arm, and the arm is facing upwards for me, but you can always face it downwards. It depends on what your preference is. So over here I ran out of string, so I got more and continued from there. Now use the same method to sew on the horns and the other arm to complete the monster. So now all the pieces are sewn onto the monster and we are going to flip it over. After stuffing the horn and the arms, the last step is to sew a heart on the monster. After writing a personal note, this is what the completed plushie should look like.